Welcome to the tutorial. This time we're going to cover importing photos into Lightroom from your compact flash card. So let's get started. You click File, Import Photos, and Lightroom brings up an import dialog. I apologize, my computer's kind of slow, doing too many things at the same time. So here we have the import dialog, and where you can see here the three main sections. On the left hand side you have the sources. In the middle you're going to have a preview of pictures that Lightroom finds in those sources, and on the top of that main window you have copy, move, and add. By default it's going to say copy from your cards. On the right hand side you have your targets and other things you can do while you import, such as adding keywords, selecting the directory where you want your files to be stored as they're copied, and you see that the thumbnails are populating. These are basic thumbnails. Lightroom will pick either JPEGs. If you shoot RAW plus JPEG, it'll use the JPEGs that are named the same as the RAW files, and it will make importing a little faster, displaying the thumbnails. From here you can double click on any of the thumbnails to look at them full screen, and at the same time you can zoom in to 100% view or anywhere in between. This way you can actually select which pictures you're going to import or not, or leave behind. This is a good way to not import photos that you don't want eventually, so it'll reduce the time of import, use up less hard drive space as well when you import. So a couple of things here: selecting that checkbox, including in the import or not. This checkbox will either select the photo for being imported once you hit the import button or not. I typically look for photos that are out of focus, or quickly look for stuff that definitely won't make it, that you definitely can leave behind. As you can see, selecting each one of the check marks can include them or not include them. You can either, as you can see, this picture is not exactly in focus, so I'm probably not going to import this photo. You can always do this later. You don't have to do this now. I just feel that by doing this now, it reduces the size of my library, and it prevents me from having to re-import everything at the same, later, going through stuff and taking up space for no reason. You can quickly go between pictures when you're in full screen mode. When you double click on a thumbnail, you can use your arrow keys left and right to go between the pictures. Another quick shortcut that I use a lot is you can select more than one photo at a time. You can select a range of photos, and selecting a range of photos and then clicking the checkbox or not, that helps you unselect or select a bunch of photos at a time. Right now I'm just going over some of the pictures. I look at the tail and the nose, I look at the logos, I look at everything that might show me that the picture is worth keeping or not. And again, this is quick, cursory. I mean, this is, if a photo is out of focus, it goes in the garbage. I just don't have time. Plus usually we get enough pictures, at least one of them is going to be in focus. If not, there'll be another time. Unless it's, as we like to joke around, unless it's the space shuttle, one-time kind of event, you always will get another opportunity to capture a photo. Most of the time, for example, in this Air China, this is a daily flight. So, and this particular plane, B2445, I've seen quite a few times. So it's a pretty regular plane. Now I'm just going through the pictures, one after the other. One quick way to go between pictures, selecting or not selecting, you can do so the X unselects a photo, P picks the photo, meaning it selects the checkbox. So Shift X will unselect that photo and immediately move you to the next one in the list. That's very useful. Makes the process go a lot quicker. That's something that's very powerful, I think. As you can see here too, the ones that are not selected are sort of dimmed. The ones that are selected are full brightness. I'm just going to select a few more here that I don't care for. Just from the thumbnail, I know they're not going to be that great. I got enough of them anyway doing this takeoff. In this case also, I know some of the shots are very far. These were shot. Some of these were shot, like for example, this was shot from Hobie. Departures of 31 left, and the distance is quite quite long, and with my camera and lens I typically get a lot of out of focus shots or just not enough pixels to be worth keeping or saving. So let's just go through a few more of these. At the same time, I'm looking at the value of the picture. Is it worth it, photographically? Is it a picture that I want to keep? Another thing that I look for, is there enough room? Is the plane too close to the frame of the photo? If it's too close to one of the frames, it's probably going to be pretty hard. I'm just going to select a bunch of them at the same time, and as you can see, if you shift click or control click to select a range of photos, you can include them or exclude them from the import very easily. I'm just going to take a look through here real quick, but like I was saying, if a photo, if the subject is too far away, it's too close to one of the frames of the picture, cropping that photo and keeping it centered is going to be kind of tough. Obviously, that's only important if you plan to ultimately upload your photos to an online database such as airliners.net or jetphotos.net. They tend to like their pictures, pictures you submit, to be centered, so that's very important. This evergreen is a little bit underexposed, so I'm probably not going to keep any of these. Now, some of these might be valuable because it's rare to catch cargo, especially evergreen, on a nice late bank out of Howard, out of 31 left and from Howard Beach, so that might be worth keeping, just for personal database reasons. I also sometimes keep pictures just because I don't have the plane. I've never caught it before, so I'll keep it even if the picture's not that great. But typically, if the picture's out of focus, I'm not gonna bother. So now let's go over to the right hand here. Some of the other parts. Clicking this box, import or don't import duplicates. Photoshop, Lightroom keeps very strict track of photos that it imports. Its database is very powerful, and that it keeps track of serial numbers and such other metadata, and it tries to figure out what's a duplicate or not. It's very good at it. You can also render previews. Here you can rename files on an import. You have a lot of choices for what you want to do with your files in terms of the name of the file. I typically don't rename my files, but you have, and it gives you a preview when you select one of these templates. You can also pick, you can edit and create your own templates. It's very powerful. It lets you really manipulate the file names with lots and lots of options. You can create those templates ahead of time, which is very nice to have. If you choose to name your files in a particular way, you can even use some of the metadata inside the file to do that renaming, and you can see a preview before you do it. Here you can actually apply one of the presets that either you created or default. In Photoshop, there's quite a few that I have here from, in Lightroom. I keep confusing this with Photoshop. And also a template for metadata. These are extremely useful and extremely powerful. I like to put as much metadata into my photos as possible. At a minimum, I recommend that everyone puts in put in your copyright information. Make sure you copyright your photos. Put your a URL for your website. Make sure you put in telephone number, email address. These minimum components are so important to identify your photos. And you might think that right now this is a hobby. In the future, if your photos, if you ever plan to really get serious about your photography hobby and maybe turn this into a business, having very rich metadata in your photos makes it very easy for an editor looking for photos to find a photo that they're looking for. So I like to describe my photos as much as possible. For security reasons, I like to add as much metadata as possible, identifying my photos as being mine. I created quite a few templates, so I picked the one for this year. This particular import is from 2010, so I just picked that preset. And I also like to keyword. The difference between keywords and perhaps some of the individual metadata that goes into a photo, I usually like to title my photos and add a caption to my photos, as a description of what the photo is. But at the same time, I also like to keyword all my photos. So in this field here, you can put as many keywords as you like to identify this import. That's very important later, when you want to find photos in your library, one of my libraries is well over 200,000 images, and I gotta say that it used to be extremely difficult to find a photo. I used to have to remember a date or time or various other information to try to narrow it down to a particular folder where that photo might be. And you can never organize your photos in a perfect way on the hard drive. You can only name your folders so much, in such powerful ways. With metadata and with keywords and things like that, you don't have to worry about where your files are. As a matter of fact, your folders can be sequentially numbered, and you can still find it via the keywords. Now let's move on. Let's put a folder name where I want to actually store these photos. I usually keep my photos in one main folder, and then I create subfolders for each import. My folders are usually labeled with the date of the shoot. That's just the way I like to store my photos. It doesn't mean much to me in terms of finding a photo because I'm probably going to search for it via metadata, but for now I like to keep them in date folder order because it just makes it easier for me to catalog and archive them. So when I put away my archives, I archive them by year into an external hard drive. And there is the new name that I just created. You notice how Lightroom kind of shows it in a grayed out italic font to show you that it's a new folder that it's creating, that it's not putting it into an existing folder. So why don't you go ahead and just hit the import button and let it go on. On the top left hand corner, you'll notice the progress bar that'll show up as the photos are being imported. Lightroom is very well designed in terms of multitasking. You can continue to use any part of Lightroom while it's doing something else. So in this case, we're importing the photos. At this time, the interface is fully functional. You can continue to, you can actually start editing some of these photos that have been imported already, or even go to another part of the library and pick up an old photo or an old folder that you've been working on or want to start working on. You can definitely do so while it's being imported. Obviously your computer is going to be a little sluggish as it's importing, but if you have a fast enough computer with enough RAM, you can go right ahead and do so. That's pretty powerful. Let this go on for a little bit here. Let it update. You can always cancel, by the way, by just hitting the X on the top on the progress bar. If you hit X, it'll just cancel the import. It'll stop importing wherever you see the last thumbnail there. Let's scroll down here. You can see that some of the photos already started to import. They came in already with some of the keywords. And let's. I'm going to start showing you. I normally wouldn't do this right now, but I just wanted to show you for the tutorial how I add specific information to a photo. I typically find all the photos in a range from the same plane, for instance, and the data that I like to put into my photos, into the title and the caption. The title, I like to put the manufacturer of the aircraft and the actual model number and the tail number, if I can. And in the caption, I like to put in the airline with the manufacturer and the tail number, as well as the description of where the plane was shot, was it takeoff or landing, and where things like that. If it's taking off or landing. Makes it easy for me to search later on. Also, you notice on the left here, there's a little thumbnail. When you zoom into full screen, it's a nice handy way to navigate your picture very easily without having to. You can also move the main screen. There's a hand that comes up and you can move the plane around the main display, but it's easier to navigate it in this moment. And zoom back out again. So let's scroll down here to the title and caption. Remember, the caption is sort of a story that you want to tell about the photo. You can put as much information as you want there. You also notice below that you're going to see a lot of metadata about your camera. And remember, metadata is data about data. So in this case, you'll notice that you have date, time the photo was shot, the folder that it's in, the camera model, the lens used, even the serial number of a camera can be Lightroom will display that. This is just a particular template that I have. Oh, by the way, the import was just done. You notice that the card was ejected, which is a nice feature of Lightroom. Once it finishes, it ejects your card, and you notice now it moved into rendering previews. Those previews will take some time, and they will take up your CPU. So I'm just going to skip ahead here through some trickery here, and move and move ahead. I just basically cut and went on because that was going to take a lot of time. So I just paused it while I let it finish, and then I picked it up again after it was done just to get some more time. So let's just take a look here at some of the photos that were imported real quick. You can see, by the way, these thumbnails, you can actually change the size of the thumbnails very easily. There's a slider at the bottom right hand corner of that screen there, of that window. So right now I'm just going to select all these evergreen ones just to show you what I do to sort of create, to tag all these photos at the same time. And I'm just going to put in the tail number and the manufacturer and the airline itself. This is Evergreen International. It's a Boeing 747, the tail number. So I'll put that in. Typically what I do is I go to either Air Fleets or even airliners.net or jetphotos.net, and I will find a plane and just take the metadata from there. It makes it a lot easier than trying to figure it out on my own. I usually will copy the name of the manufacturer and the tail number and put that into the title. There's a reason why I do that. It's really not important. It's just my own personal preference. The title is used by some other functions that I have that pick up data from the metadata from different fields, and I just happen to like the way it gets formatted. You can do this any way you want to, but just remember that the caption is where you want to write a story about that photo. Now, if you have hundreds and thousands of photos, you might want to standardize on just a very simple way to do it. But always be aware that you have the power there to do that. You now notice that these other photos don't have any data there because all I did was the evergreen ones, and these are empty. So we can go back. You see that the data is now in that particular photo, even though I wasn't really doing any. I did all of those evergreens all at the same time. So now all those photos have been tagged with that metadata. It's in the database, and the photos are not touched. Remember, all the things that Lightroom does, everything that Lightroom does not touch your original files ever. Everything that you do is a set of instructions that are kept in the catalog itself. You should protect your catalogs very much, make backups of them and whatnot. But at the same time, it does not touch your originals at all. Just zoom in here and start to go through some of these pictures here, just to inspect them a little bit. I like critical sharpness. I'm very anal about how sharp a picture is. I typically look for logos, windows, text, very fine print, fine lines on a plane. If they're even slightly out of focus or motion blurred, I'll usually dump that picture in the bin. When I like a photo, I usually like to label it with 5 stars. A green label will also tell me that I'm either planning to export that photo to use for uploading into the web, or uploading to one of the online databases or my own website. That's what the green does for me. A 5 just tells me that that's a pic. That's a very good quality picture, in focus, well exposed, and it just helps me later on filter very quickly. I could just basically filter by stars or by color, and I can easily narrow down my searches very quickly by doing that. So labeling your photos is kind of important. As you get through a photo that you really like, give it 4 stars, 5 stars, give it a color rating. That's kind of important. So again, I'm just going to do the same thing here with these photos here, since I'm planning to I will sometimes do this ahead of time. Sometimes I'll do it as I'm editing. Sometimes I spend an evening just going through my photos and tagging them. No edit going on, just basically cataloging, maintaining the database, giving it lots of metadata. I cannot emphasize how important it is to put metadata on all your photos. It is critical. You're going to really find it useful later on. When you first start doing it, you're going to say this is a lot of work for no reason. If you care at all about your library, about your collection of photos, having rich data on your photos makes it so much easier for you to find what you're looking for and to eventually size your collection. You can tell what's happened. So why don't we pick this photo here and edit it. So let's move over to the develop module. It's going to take a little bit because my computer's doing quite a lot of things at the same time. I'm recording this and I'm editing in Lightroom, which is not exactly. It's actually pretty heavy on your hardware. It does use up a lot of CPU. It uses up a lot of memory and acceleration if you have it on your video cards. So now that we move into the develop module, we let Lightroom actually process it in the development engine. It will actually take the raw data if you have it and process it. I notice already this picture, even though it was shot at ISO 320, which is kind of low, this particular camera, my D2X, is not exactly that clean. The sensor is pretty noisy. Anything above 100 ISO, it's actually pretty noisy. So why don't we the first thing I like to do is crop the picture. Usually if the plane is in the air, I just do a very quick, I just typically do, hang on 1 second here, wait for the computer to catch up. I just like to do a quick cropping and centering. I don't bother with rotating the picture or centering it, leveling it, because there's really no point. There's no reference points to worry about. Here, Photoshop, I keep confusing this with Photoshop. Lightroom is the same engine that Photoshop Adobe Camera Raw module is. Every control is identical. It's actually, they share the same DLLs. My camera has profiles from Adobe that ship with the product. And I usually typically pick for the particular camera that I've been using. This is a D2X. I'll pick either one of the first 3 D2X profiles that ship with the product. Next, I move over to the lens correction module. This lets me apply lens correction. This is new in Lightroom 3.3. It's extremely powerful. Adobe or yourself, you can use the same templates that Adobe does. You can shoot special targets with your camera and a particular lens, and then bring it into a special program that will actually look at the photo and geometrically correct for any problems that it sees physically, such as you can see here, I'm using different, I'm forcing it to use different profiles from different lenses. It'll correct things like barreling, pink cushioning, chromatic aberrations. It's really, really powerful, and I recommend everybody just uses it. Lightroom, Adobe keeps adding lots and lots of lens and camera combinations to the database. Let's move over to the next module up from the bottom, which is the detail module. Here I'm going to use a trick, which is the Alt key on the PC. It's the Option key on the Mac. If you hold down the Alt key while you move these sliders, it will actually change to a different display mode to show you what's going on. Since Lightroom applies sharpening only to the brightness information in the image, it does not care about color. It shows it to you in black and white, which is very useful. The radius controls how far from the center of a contrast barrier between 2 different contrasting colors or lightnesses will the engine look to sharpen, right? So that's important. If you hold down the Alt key, it shows you that. And then if you go down to the detail basically is a third control, it's totally separate from the other 2. This basically just emphasizes very fine details, or it de-emphasizes them. It only concentrates on the most minutest details, a couple of pixels around. It's kind of a nice feature to have. I typically don't use it much, but you can really go nuts with this, and it won't affect the image tremendously. Since I do my final sharpening in Photoshop, I typically leave these at default. The mask is very interesting. If you do this without the Alt key, you can't really tell what's going on, but watch what happens when I hold down the Alt key. You can actually visually see the mask in action. Anything that's black is not going to be touched. Anything that's white will be sharpened. I can't imagine not having this visual cue. It's really, really wonderful to be able to see what's going on. Before, it was basically you were hunting in the dark, or you had to really know what the number meant. This way, very quickly, I can leave out the sky, for instance, from the sharpening, which is basically my goal there. Now I'm going to move up to the tone curve. This is a little trick that I like to use in order to see any dust spots. And again, look, I'm moving very quickly because I just wanted to give you an overview of a end-to-end session. This really wasn't meant to dive deep into any one of these components, so I'm moving very quickly. I apologize for that. Feel free to ask me any questions in the forum about this, any part of this, and I will answer in more detail. As a matter of fact, I'm planning to do very specific tutorials on particular topics. And what I do is, as you can see from the tone curve that I've selected, I'll usually compress it quite a lot. This actually exposes things that are not visibly obvious from the normal exposures. You can see there's a little bit of artifacting going on, but nothing stands out as a big dust spot or a dust bunny, which is basically going to show up later on in your workflow. And you really don't want you want to have your pictures as best as they can be produced, as I like to call it. Your output, your goal should always be for the highest quality. If your goal is to produce the finest photos that you can, take care and spend the time to actually do do the work that you can do. You know, the most amount of work that you can do to make your pictures as best as possible. Once I'm done doing that, I put it back. The big eyedropper is basically a white balance tool. What it does basically is just it finds an area that you consider to be neutral, right, such as white or black or gray, something without color. And you can see the display actually shows you the three components at the bottom of that little window that comes up, and you can pick then that you clicking on that spot will actually neutralize that color, and it will actually make it the same value across all three channels. I'm going to just go through the different settings here, the different modes, so you can see what the picture looks like. Different components. Auto didn't do a very good job. I didn't particularly care for it. Daylight is probably pretty good. The sun was shining pretty bright. Cloudy, even though it seems to be cloudy, it wasn't cloudy as far as the sun shining on the plane. There were clouds behind the plane that didn't affect the light, so you shouldn't trust the cloudy. And some of these are completely offbeat. I go back to my custom setting. Usually, if a plane like this one, Cathay Pacific, has a lot of white, this is really great because it helps it out. Exposure, the auto button. Some people hate it, some people love it. I don't really care. I think that if it works, abuse it. It's one of my mottos. If auto works, go for it. Knock yourself out. That is a wonderful thing to have an auto button that actually works great. Very few auto buttons work that well. In this case, I don't quite think that it did a good job. So let's just take a look at some of the things here that it did. By pressing this little icon here to the upper left hand corner of the histogram, it'll turn on clipping on the dark side of the image. It'll show you anything that's pure black, basically no detail. There is no data in those areas that are highlighted blue. The one on the right, as you can assume, is for highlights and the brightest areas in the image. Those areas that highlight red are pure white, 255 level 255 or 100% of that particular mix. That's obvious in this particular shot because the sun was reflecting on those areas that you see highlighted. So that's pretty obvious, and that's actually okay. Everybody tolerates that. It's an obvious thing. So we can leave that alone. I just want to tweak it a little bit. The image is probably a little bit too contrasty for my taste. So, and again, this is all down to taste. It's whatever you like. All right. If you feel like your images are too bright, now the brightness and exposure controls work very differently. I will expand on that one day in another tutorial. It's important to know that they do different things and they do it differently. The exposure control is very rough. I mean, it will do some very large changes in your data, whereas the brightness control is a lot less heavy-handed. I'm just looking around here and trying to get a feel for the photo. I don't like my photos to be too contrasty. I usually do that in Photoshop. I finalize my final thing. So now that I'm happy with it, I'm just basically going to export my photo into Photoshop. There are many ways to do this. I'm not going to get into the details right now. I have a preset already that I use for exporting for the databases. Just to make it real quick, all it is it exports as a TIFF file, 16-bit, and sRGB color space. It's just my own personal taste and workflow. I will change that up as I feel like it. Once the file is exported, I usually don't, again, there's many ways to do this. I usually like to export it as a separate file that I'm going to work on Photoshop differently. So now I go to that folder, take that TIFF file. As you can see, it's pretty big, and I'm going to drag it over to my Photoshop. And once Photoshop pops up, I'm going to drop it into Photoshop and take a look at it, and we'll do some final touches there. Okay, so now the photos in Photoshop. One of the things that I love the most about Photoshop, one of the nice features, is the auto color. Auto color is just amazing. Just taking a look here, make sure that my settings. I typically become pretty anal in my old age from experience. I usually double check and triple check things because I make lots of mistakes. So one of the things that I like, I usually inspect the photo up and down. One of the things that I love the most about Photoshop is auto color, and we'll talk about it more in the future. The power of auto color. It's not perfect, but for the most part, it does a great job of improving a photo tremendously. Completely automatic. Well, not so automatically. There are some controls that it has, as you can see here. I don't quite like the look of this photo. Even though it's more accurate, believe it or not. I particularly don't like it photographically. It doesn't work for me. I like this version a little bit better. I really enjoy having the original camera capture in this case. So I'm just going to use a different control here. I'm going to just go to the levels, and I'm going to compress the histogram. There's many ways to call this, that people call this, but I tend to call it compressing the histogram, which is fine. All you're doing is removing areas of the data of the image that don't have any data. So basically any flat lines in that image on the left hand side are basically no shadow values, and then on the right hand side there are no highlight values in those areas. So I just basically bring the sliders in that removes that unwanted data and compresses the histogram. It basically redistributes the data around the 16 bits that you have to play with in there. And again, this is all very high level stuff, and I'm not going to cover it now. We can get into that later. Now I'm just going to put up this my trick again. This here, I prefer this for doing spots, to clean up spots, just because I can see what I'm doing. Normally people use the invert trick, the equalize trick. So some people actually use invert as well, which doesn't work very well. So I just create basically an adjustment layer above my base layer, and I go and I basically compress the histogram until I see and reveal any of the stuff that you normally wouldn't see from the normal exposure in the image. These will reveal really wide, very slight contrasty areas, usually dust spots that are invisible on the normal exposure. So this image looks pretty clean. I'm just going to move on. But that little trick works for me because then when I'm doing the healing brush, I can actually see it live, actually do the work, and I don't have to do like when you do equalization. It's tough because you can't see what you're doing. You're kind of working blind. You have to go back and forth. So let's just resize the image. I want to make sure you pay attention to all these little settings here. You can pause the video if you want. You must rescale, and you must keep it basically locked in place to keep the aspect ratio. Is very important. I like to use bicubic. That is very important. That will keep all the lines as smooth as possible for final sharpening. Don't worry about the DPI. DPI really doesn't matter when you're outputting to the web. DPI is only important when you print. So you can have a picture that's 10,000 DPI. It doesn't matter. It will still display the same way on the web. Okay, so what are we doing here? So I like to, let's just take a quick look. I'm going to do the equalize on a separate layer just to take a look to make sure that I didn't miss any spots that might have crept up. So let's just do some quick sharpening. After my output size has been set to 1200. This photo is pretty sharp to begin with, so I'm just going to do simple unsharp masking. You notice that the image, you may or may not notice that the image is pretty sharp to begin with, and it doesn't really need that much work. If you basically click on the little thumbnail preview, it will show you a preview of before and after of what the effect is going to do. Then I like to mask my sharpening layer a little bit, because I sometimes like to mask out or basically hide the areas that I don't want to be sharpened that much, and only leave those areas exposed or showing that have the sharpening that I want. For example, in this case, the Cathay Pacific logo is already sharp enough, and the unsharp mask layer actually made it a little bit over sharpened to my taste, so I'm just going to mask that out. As you can see, what I added was a reveal all layer mask. Reveal all means that it's white, everything is showing through, and then with a black brush with a very small opacity and flow, I'm going over those areas. I'm painting in the mask. I'm painting over those areas that I want to hide the effect of the sharpening in that layer. And again, layers are top to bottom. They basically show through the image if they're opaque in any way. They allow the bottom layers to show through. I'm just going to flip over. You can toggle the mask on and off to see what you did, and you can turn the mask completely on and off to see what the effect is. Sometimes it's a minor thing. You may not visually see it. You might have to zoom in pretty tight to see what happened. So now I'll just collapse all the layers. Let's put this over to 8 bits just so we can save it to JPEG. JPEGs cannot be 16 bits. It must be saved as 8 bits. Okay, file, save as. You want to save it. Oops, I picked the wrong one. Save for web. I don't. You can use save for web. It's fine. But I like to keep my metadata in my pictures, so I use save as. If you use save for web, it'll remove all the metadata from the image, such as the camera model, date, time, description, title. Here I pick JPEG, and I will usually label the picture with the dimensions of the photo. I'm going to make use of this photo for only one thing, so it really doesn't matter. This is going to get discarded anyway after I upload it. And make sure your the color profile is attached to the image. You want to pick 12, the maximum resolution of the image, 12 and maximum, and use baseline. Do not use optimize, because optimize will redo the compression of the photo. You want the highest quality you can get. And that's that. That's about it. Now, I usually like to check the picture out in just a Windows viewer, in some other viewer, usually on the web. Sometimes I drop it into Firefox or Internet Explorer to take a look at it. I'm just going to bring it up here real quick. I want to see what it looks like in a standard viewer. Make sure I didn't mess anything up, such as the color profile, or make sure that the JPEG was saved properly. Sometimes I've had JPEGs corrupted on save, and I don't catch it till it's too late, and then I have to go back and do the whole thing. I'm already noticing that the image is a little bit noisy. I zoom in usually to see if there's anything that stands out, and this still has a lot of noise left over. So that's probably because of the way we exposed it and the way I processed it. I probably revealed more of the data in the shadow areas, more, any dark data that didn't really exist to begin with, because my camera is pretty horrible at it. Trying to emphasize that data, basically all it does is emphasize the garbage that was there to begin with. My D2X does not record a lot of data in shadows. So I'm going to go back to the Photoshop image and just do a denoising on the image. So I'm going to go back to my original TIFF. All that work that we did was gone, just because I chose to I don't have, my memory is very low on my computer. I only have 4 gigs of RAM, so I don't have enough room for a history buffer that's that large, so I don't have that many steps. We'll talk about that in a different tutorial. So right now, let me just go down here to one of my favorite programs. It's called ImageNomic Noiseware, and it's a very quick program. I also use Neat Image, but this program is pretty quick. As you can see here in the preview, you can click down to look at the before and then let go to see the results after. The default works very well. It's just getting rid of just a little bit of noise. I don't want that much noise gone. You may or may not be able to tell from the quality of the video on YouTube, but there's just a slight difference. So a little bit of Control Z back and forth. You can see the difference before and after. A little bit cleaner. A lot cleaner to my taste. Now we're going to go through the same process again. Resize the image. 1200 wide is one of my preferred sizes. Hit Control 1 to get you to a. There you go. And you'll see I turned on the callouts. Will show you the keystrokes that I'm using. Hopefully down at the bottom. I'm going to go through my levels again. Compress them a little bit. See, the picture doesn't have to pop now. Watch it pop once I do this compression. You notice how the picture just gets a nice little contrast to it. You don't want to blow the whites, okay? Always be careful. Keep checking with your color picker, or just put your cursor over any area of the image, and you can look over in the histogram. I'm not showing you right now because I'm kind of working fast, trying to make the video smaller. I'll show you that later another time. I zoom in, usually click around to make sure that I see the effect before and after. Make sure I'm not overdoing it. But always make sure that your whites are not beyond 250, 245, 250 in level. 255 is pure white. You don't want it to be pure white. I'm just masking out the areas again that I did before. Serves just as a quick review, I guess. And by the way, I'm narrating this after I did the tutorial, so if it sounds like I'm a little bit off sync, that's the reason why. I apologize for that. I'm trying to work from memory. Somehow I haven't gotten enough practice to do this while I'm doing the actual tutorial, so I apologize for that. I'm also using a headset, so you might hear a lot of noise from the headset. I'm going to use a better microphone in the future. Alright, let's save this out again, and this time I'm going to give it a different file name. I like to keep both of them around just so I can compare the before and after. I'm going to call this one B. Same thing. Or noise reduction, actually, NR. 12, highest quality. Always look at the size of the image too. If you a 1200 pixel image should be somewhere around 350K or above. If it's any less than that, you may not have that much quality in it. It's either not sharp enough, or there isn't that much detail in it. That's a good sign that your output is not that great. Okay, so let's take a look at it now. It's definitely a lot cleaner than the other one. I usually just look at the shadow areas. Your highlight areas are not going to show noise at all. Very little, if any, in most cameras. See the old, this is the previous version of it. It's a lot noisier. And this one is a lot cleaner. So I'm much happier with this image than the other one. And we're getting towards the end here. That's about it. Okay, so for now, that ends this, and we'll see you next time.